Hello and welcome to another episode of the Noizze podcast as part of the Noizze Podcast Network. Today myself and Kris review the 16th Megadeth album, The Sick, The Dying and The Dead. It's out on 2nd of September and it's really good. Listen to us wax lyrical about the record and follow us on all available social medias. Please follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast Network, at Noizze UK. Please like and subscribe to us on YouTube. Please listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Check the anchor link for wherever you get your podcasts, and also follow us on every relevant social media like Instagram and Facebook and all that good stuff. Thank you so much and enjoy the episode.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 112 of the Noizze Podcast Portal, the Noizze Podcast Network, and sponsored by Stereo Brain Records. I am your host / your boy, Chris Pugh, and as ever, I'm joined by my very good friend and Mr. Cynical himself, Samuel Lewis. Mate, how are we?
Can't be too bad on a day like today. Beautiful sunlight, Megadeth album. Let's get at it.
Mate, let's get at it. Before we get into that, the best way to support us, the Noizze Podcast, is by liking / subscribing. We are available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Me and Sam will be there. That is absolutely the best way to support us. You can follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast Network. Both me and Sam run that account. You can follow the general Noizze Twitter account as well at Noizze UK. On our last episode of the Noizze Podcast, we reviewed a new Machine Head record of Kingdom and Crane. We really enjoyed that, both of us. I think we said fifth best in their catalogue at 13 albums, so brilliant return to form for them. Please go and check that out if you are yet to. But Sam, you know what? I usually do a little bit of chat, see how things are. I just want to get straight into this record, man. Should we just get going?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Let's do it. The Sick, The Dying and The Dead is Megadeth, the Californian Thrash King's 16th, ridiculous, album, out on September 2nd via UME Records, and it's the follow-up to the Grammy Award-winning, interestingly, as some of you might have forgotten, Dystopia, which was released in 2016. This part was probably predictable, Sam, but I'm going to do it anyway. The fact we've still got Machine Head, just because I just said Machine Head, Megadeth, in the metal sphere, is a wonderful thing. And above all else, I think we should just be happy about that alone. If we go back to the early part of the 21st century, Dave Mustaine suffers his arm injury. He has to reteach himself how to play guitar, ridiculous. And you'd think that would spell curtains for the band. Somehow it didn't. They've had a revolving door of members over their near 40-year history. I can't imagine they've ever had too much trouble finding guitarists who want to play with Dave Mustaine. But still, there has been a revolving door of members. And then obviously, most recently, Dave was diagnosed with throat cancer, which thankfully he's in remission for. And I'm just relieved he's still here, still playing. I think we should just make comment on that first of all, Sam, that we've still got Megadeth releasing records in 2022, because there were multiple scenarios over the past 2 decades where that could have been taken from us.
No, you're absolutely right. I think having Dave Mustaine makes metal better. I think Dave Mustaine is one of metal's most vivid and most instantly recognisable characters, for better or for worse. He's been incredibly iconic over the last 40 years for his exploits in Megadeth, but also some of his interviews and some of his commentary and all this sort of stuff. He's been one of metal's most was one of the faces of metal, is what I'd like to describe him as historically, and having him still knocking around is wonderful. Obviously, you mentioned the conditions of his life over the last decade or two, the hand surgery, the cancer, the revolving members of doors. I mean, David Ellefson, his longtime partner in crime at bass, is no longer with the band after like 20 years on and then a few years off, and then he came back and then he's gone again. And you're right. I mean, one of the most interesting side plots in metal history is the list of guitarists who played him at Megadeth, but also nearly played in Megadeth. There's Slash references nearly joining Megadeth in the late 80s during like a downtime for Guns N' Roses when he was hanging out with Dave Mustaine. Dave Mustaine famously asked Vinnie Paul to be the drummer in Pantera. No, it was the other way around. He famously asked Dimebag Darrell to be the guitarist in Pantera, but refused when Dimebag asked if Vinnie Paul could come with him. And Mustaine was like, we've already got a drummer. Imagine that. By the way, in the early 90s, that would have been pretty good, wouldn't it? And it's just, there's been a rotating cast of guys over there. But yes, Dave Mustaine always the figurehead and one of thrash's and metal's and music's greatest musicians.
Megadeth are famously considered one of the big four of thrash in Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. But you know what, Sam? I had this kind of epiphany about 25 minutes ago. I posted it on Twitter because it just quickly came to me, and now I want to ask you about it. I would say, is Dave Mustaine the best musician out of the big four, with perhaps Jeff Hanneman the only one that would push him close? I think he is.
Are we considering all past members included? Because I'd like to nominate Dave Lombardo and Cliff Burton.
Yeah. Well, obviously, if I'm counting Jeff Hanneman, of course, I would count Lombardo and Burton as well. Burton probably would. Yeah, he's probably neck and neck really with Mustaine and Burton, isn't he?
It is, yeah. I was going to say,
if we're talking modern contemporary, I would say comfortably Mustaine. Including historically, I think it would probably be neck and neck between Mustaine and Burton because, and you know this more than me, but even like I'm aware that Burton was just a massive part of those three first Metallica records in terms of like the construction of them, how they sound, the things they do when they do them, especially Master of Puppets as well, which is obviously their greatest work. So yeah, it's probably neck and neck between Burton and Mustaine, but in modern day, I would say it's comfortably Mustaine.
I think Mustaine is definitely the musician that's maintained somehow a stamina that no other thrash musician appears to have managed. You listen to some of his recent works, including this record, and it's like he's not aged. It's astonishing. I would say it's tough, really. I think Dave Mustaine is the most talented, probably the most talented and most creative guitarist out of all of the big four thrash bands. But then you start getting to like you split hairs. Is Dave Mustaine a better lead guitarist than James Hetfield is a rhythm guitarist? Is Dave Mustaine a better lead guitarist than Dave Lombardo was a drummer? And then you've got Cliff Burton hanging over it all because if you interview every single Mustaine, Hammett, Hetfield, Ulrich, people that have just seen him play, they will admit even now, James Hetfield was writing Battery, and he's considered Cliff Burton a god. Do you know what I mean? Like it was that they just considered him like another worldly, like alien type figure. But I think if you restrict it down to like the main figures in their band, and you look at like Mustaine, maybe you look at Kerry King, maybe you look at James Hetfield. Mustaine is probably comfortably the best technical guitarist out of the three of them.
Yeah. That's probably where I sit as well. I immediately thought of Jeff Hanneman pushing him close because I think that Rain in Blood's the best thrash metal record ever written, and I think that Hanneman is probably the leading force on that album. Not taking anything away from Kerry King, of course, but Hanneman is the leading force on Rain in Blood, and I think Rain in Blood's the best thrash metal album ever. I don't think there's no way it's ever going to be touched. So it's an interesting conversation we could probably get into the semantics of on an episode on its own. I'm actually almost ashamed of myself that I didn't think of Cliff Burton. I think it's because I've got this thing where I was, for better or worse, like ignore bassists sometimes. I'm like the classic meme of when the bassist tries to get with the girl and she's like, "Oh, you're the bassist. I'm not interested. Where's the vocalist?" So yeah. I'm kind of ashamed of myself for almost forgetting Cliff Burton there, but yeah, it's probably neck and neck between Mustaine and Burton at the very least. In terms of modern day, Mustaine is comfortably out there. Before we get into the actual record itself, Sam, I'm just curious of your top three Megadeth records. I'd probably go Euthanasia third, Peace Sells second, and Rust in Peace at first. I'd imagine there's going to be some kind of. I'd imagine Peace Sells is first for you, and then Rust in Peace comes somewhere between second or third. Go
on. Rust in Peace is first, then it's Peace Sells.
Oh, and then sick.
And then it's Countdown to Extinction. He's third.
Interesting.
Yeah, Countdown to Extinction, Symphony of Destruction, Skin of My Teeth, and Foreclosure of a Dream. That's what sells it for me. Rust in Peace is perfect. Rust in Peace is the greatest thrash album of the 1990s. Megadeth are the best thrash band of the 1990s. It's not close. Their three albums: 1990, Rust in Peace; 92, Countdown to Extinction; and 94's Euthanasia. That's it, thrash metal band. That's it. That's it for 90s thrash. That's as good as you're gonna get, really. And they're just a superb band. So yeah, those are my top three. My favorite Megadeth song is on Peace Sells in Wake Up Dead. But like like with Ride the Lightning, it doesn't make it a better overall album just because my favourite songs on there, Rust in Peace, is perfect.
So going into this album, The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead, I had obviously come to the realisation it would be wild for me to expect something near my top 3. But I figured, Sam, that we might get maybe a 13 or a So Far So Good. What were your expectations coming in?
Yeah, that's a fair question. The thing is, though, Megadeth, my expectations are slightly higher than it would have been if Slayer had brought out an album, and Anthrax. Maybe not Metallica because you're kind of hoping, but really, Megadeth have been the most consistent of the last decade, and I kind of know that they have the highest floor of any big thrash band as well. If this is a bad Megadeth album by bad Megadeth album standards, this is probably still a 6.5 out of 10 with some amazing intricate guitar work on there that I could at least hang my hat on and enjoy as a listening experience, even if the songs aren't necessarily there. And I would argue that's what Dystopia is. Dystopia is not a great album, I don't think. And at its best, it is another sign of Dave Mustaine's fantastic musicianship, and there's always some great solos and some great songwriting. So I thought my expectations going into this record was at the very least there's going to be like 12 great guitar solos on here and a few really good riffs, and that's a higher floor than most bands with a career that length.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we just before again, I keep saying this before we talk about the album, just quickly, with the exception of Super Collider and Risk, I think Megadeth. I don't think I've ever heard a bad Megadeth album. Super Collider is pretty whack. Risk, I could happily never listen to again. But I don't think I've ever really heard like a bad Megadeth album. And considering we're 40 years in nearly, that is saying something in 16 albums. And, you know, Megadeth have absolutely got their blueprints. I say Megadeth have got their blueprint. Dave Mustaine has very much got his blueprint. But what a blueprint. And like you mentioned, like their run in the early 90s, like from 90 to 95, ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's splitting hairs really between Euthanasia and Countdown to Extinction for me in terms of my top 3. And I know that Euthanasia was a little bit. Some people find it a little bit grating how quote unquote mainstream, but there was something of a move towards a more kind of mainstream etiquette in the songwriting. But I really like Euthanasia. I think Sweating Bullets is just such an absolute banger. So as we get into this record, Sam, the one thing that I did just quickly want to point out, you alluded to it. David Ellefson, longtime bassist, is no longer part of the band. Feel free to Google that scenario if you wish. However, the reason why I'm bringing this up is you would then expect the parts that David Ellefson would have recorded would have still been left on the masters, and then they would have wrote songs around that. However, his bass parts were actually re-recorded for this album, I believe by Steve DiGiorgio from Testament. So just an interesting note there that actually there is no imprint from David Ellefson on this
anyone
album
knows Dave Mustaine he's not remotely surprising at all.
So literally David Ellefson, despite laying down bass parts for this album previously, is not on it at all. His parts are re-recorded by Steve DiGiorgio from Testament. Okay, Sam, let's go. I am majorly impressed with this album. I really dig it. I think with Machine Head, we said that Kingdom and Crown was best case scenario. I don't think this is best case scenario. I think it's a very good scenario.
That's interesting. Is that because you have higher expectations for Megadeth, or because this album isn't as good in comparison to what Kingdom of Crown is for Machine Head?
I feel like this album isn't as good in comparison to what Kingdom and Crown is for Machine Head, though that is not a knock. I still think there's lots of absolutely really brilliant moments of musicianship of just classic Megadeth on this album. I'll be honest, Sam, I prefer Machine Head as a band to Megadeth. So
yeah, okay.
That is my central bias. That's my central bias aligning. As much as I love Megadeth, great band. So happy I saw them at Download with you a couple of months ago, and then Iron Maiden after. What a day that was. I prefer Machine Head as a band for me. So I would take Machine Heads of Kingdom and Crown over this. But that is absolutely no knock. I think it's a really great. This is the best thrash album I've heard in years.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is going to get top 10 album of the year consideration for me. I love this record.
This is great.
It is absolutely tremendous. we talk about best case scenarios, talk about writing styles, talk about blueprints a lot, and all this type of stuff. But for a band to say, for Dave Mustaine to still sound this good vocally and on guitar is astonishing, absolutely astonishing. You're right that they have got a style, but it still works. Like the title track to open this, that sinister guitar, the cyclical technical riffs, Dave Mustaine's voice. Just the thing is about Dave Mustaine, which I give him massive respect for. He knows that he's not a strong vocalist, so he uses his voice almost the way that other bands use guitar solos, and then he uses guitar solos the way that other bands use vocal melodies, and he's just swapped it. He's just swapped it round. So the vocals are just functional, right? The vocals are just verse lines before you get to the bit that you're really here for. In the same way that guitar solos used to be used to give the vocalist a break before the big chorus kicks in. Dave Mustaine's like, you're not here for big choruses. You're here for guitar solos. They're the choruses, and that's exactly what's going on here. So this is just terrific. I didn't think the clean dystopia element of it with the nursery rhyme worked necessarily, but I thought that the following riff with this breakdown thrash shake-up was both melodic and anthemic, and it fades into this classic Megadeth harmony, just absolutely like nailed on blueprint. This could have happened in 1992 and wouldn't feel out of place at all. Type of songwriting. It's a really great start. From the moment this album opens, all the way through this record are lots of little Easter eggs to like classic Megadeth sounds and styles, which for me was a refreshing, almost nostalgic trip through the best of Megadeth. Which, considering that outside of Dave Mustaine, none of the other members were around for, is kind of insane. How he keeps finding people that are somehow able to fit in to his overall sound. It's extraordinary, because you'd think with the amount of different members that at some point there'd be a Megadeth album that sounds a little bit different, but it absolutely doesn't. That he's managed to sort of, almost like Arsene Wenger, like used to find players that just perfectly fit into this like mold, and he just find this random dude from like Africa, this random guy from Asia, and so now they'd all fit together. It's like Samir Nasri and Cesc Fabregas suddenly like fit together, and they're from completely different areas. It's wild, and this is what's happening here. Like he's able to find all these different musicians and fit them together and produce this quintessentially Megadeth sound, and it works brilliantly. Kris, before we get into the rest of the album, some of the songs in here are terrific.
Oh, mate, absolutely. I mean, just to back end off what you were saying there, if you just said to me, Kris, how do you want this album to open? I would have said, I'd take a clean mid-tempo riff that builds to a thrash lick. That's exactly what happens. It's really, the opening of this album. The opening of this album is absolutely wicked. I love it, mate. There are some. We're going to go into more detail later on. Mate, there are some fantastic Megadeth songs on this album. I adore Mission to Mars. There's a moment at the end of Mission to Mars when we talk about it. I'm not going to spoil. I'm not going to spoil for anyone. Any Megadeth fan listening to this, I'm not going to spoil the coolest moments on the album. Something very specific happens at an Easter egg to a previous Megadeth album, and it's the coolest thing. It is so sick. I love Mission to Mars. I love Killing Time. I've got big euthanasia vibes from that. I love Sacrifice as well. I was mega into Soldier On. I know that's one of the singles. I really like Soldier On. Too. I like Dave Mustaine when he's being like kind of satirical with his lyrics. I do like Dave when he's messing about a little bit. And as we go into like the second track, that's another one that I wanted to mention. Life in Hell opens quite differently to the opening title track. It's got this high octane punching riff to open, but I've always liked kind of Dave's darker lyricisms. And there's quite a lot of Dave's darker lyricism on this album. The monologue about life being pointless, so you should absolve as many substances as you can. It's poignant for modern society as well as fascinating, and something that Megadeth do a lot that they do better than 99% of bands, especially all of the bands I can think off the top of my head. The way they quickly change tempo is unbelievable, and they do it on this. There's a quick tempo change that goes from a sliding thrash number to this kind of segment of spoken word hard rock, and it's so good. I off the top of my head, I cannot think, so I will just say 99% of bands would love to do tempo changes as well as Megadeth do. They're unbelievable at doing a tempo change.
I completely agree. The way they could just shift style as well on sort of a on a dime, let alone just let alone just slow to fast and faster slow. The way I just completely changed the whole structure of the song is fantastic. I really like Life in Hell as well. There's a brilliant groove in the middle with some great drums, really easy to nod your head along to. It's a great beating heart through the song. I like that they use solos, like guitar solos, as like after the first chorus, as like a way to break up the song and sort of kick into the second verse. Night Stalkers featuring Ice-T.
Yeah, this was a single. I remember being nervous when I heard about this. I was really nervous about it.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Actually, a great song that doesn't need Ice-T at all. The feature adds nothing. Like
Yeah.
they actually stop the song essentially, play some atmospherics and sirens. He raps for 8 bars, and then they go back into what the song was anyway. And the great, if you just took that out and fitted the two bits together, the song's sick. Like Ice-T
Yeah.
is just like the halftime entertainment in the midst of a great Super Bowl, and it just doesn't add anything. But the riff at the opening of this,
Mm.
just the blistering thrash riff, it's just sensational. And then it just reminds you once again that Dave Mustaine is such a great writer of riffs.
Oh,
Like
mate.
every song has like 3 great riffs and 3 great solo sections. There's the acoustic section of this, which is really nice, really ambitious, and then kicks right into this nice little bit where the bass riff kicks in, then the guitar mimics it back to back to this fast paced riff, and then they do the old Megadeth Metallica trick where they kick back into like the like one of the opening verse riffs for the final section of the song, and it's just like bordering on like prog thrash, which is really really cool. It's a great song and really 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 enjoyable. I like there's so much about this I really really liked. I thought the chorus on Dogs of Chernobyl is great. I thought that it's beautifully melodic, and there's like the halftime with the cool solo was really really nice. I thought Sacrifice is really good and really groovy. Um, I think it takes a bit of foot off the pedal a little bit with Junkie and Psychopathy a little bit. I think those are
Yeah,
album
I wasn't a
tracks.
massive fan of Junkie. I wasn't a massive fan of Junkie, but I think Junkie is also like a great signifier of what this album achieves, in the sense of I think Junkie's the weakest track on the album, but it's not like a turkey. It just
No,
happens to be
no,
the song with the least happening.
yeah.
And I feel like Dave's vocals get exposed a little bit by the kind of tame lyrics, and there's much better riffs elsewhere on the album. As you've mentioned, everyone knows that Dave Mustaine, and himself included, isn't a tremendous vocalist. That's not what Megadeth are for. But I feel like when Dave's lyrics are really interesting and like thought provoking, it kind of covers up the fact that he's not a fantastic vocalist. But on
Mm.
Junkie, because the lyrics are kind of tame and it's all a little bit silly, I feel like his vocals get exposed a little bit. Can I just quickly go back to Dogs of Chernobyl?
Yeah,
The
please.
flamenco led intro in
Yeah,
front
it's
of like the
nice.
emphatic rhythm section. Mate, I thought that was amazing. I was kind of hoping it would build into being like the thematic imprint for the song, which doesn't quite happen. But I just wanted to quickly mention that because I loved that opening. So interesting. It's so interesting. It's a nice change of pace from it comes in fourth. That does it. It's a nice change of pace. So like the very much like kind of standard progressive Megadeth songs up to that point. I loved that intro of Dogs of Chernobyl.
I would agree. There's some lots of lovely moments just hidden in the midst of songs. Like I really like there's like a Mastodon-esque riff and Sacrifice at the end of
Yeah,
it, that sort of Discord riff. It's really groovy. And then if you listen to Killing Time, you can actually hear Avenged Sevenfold stealing ideas from the chorus in Killing Time, with this like
yeah.
snake like riff with the chorus over the top. And then the half time to finish is just fantastic. This great breakdown riff and really like this beautiful transition into the solos, really, really great. I know you mentioned that Soldier On is a single. I just want to mention it. It's terrific. The solo
Yeah, it is.
section, the harmony section at the end of this is fucking phenomenal. It's really, really great. And then Sell You Batante opens with like the best riff of Motley Crue's career by the sounds of things. Because he's got those like sort of big fucking like glam metal chords almost, or like Merciful Fate, kind of like new wave of British heavy metal type stuff. Nice chunky riff in the middle section. And then we get to Mission to Mars, so I'll hand the mic back to you for that.
Well, just quickly, again, I'm sorry to go back to songs that you've already spoken about.
Not at
Something I
all.
want to mention for Killing Time. I actually alluded to when I spoke about this, the songs on this album that I really liked. I got a big euthanasia vibes from Killing Time in terms of the verse chord progressions in particular, which of course great for me. There's a lovely little change of tact in the middle eight as it takes a left turn, becomes more progressive and complex. And I feel like Killing Time is like a real musician's song, if that makes sense. There's
Yeah.
a guitar playoff between Dave and Kiko on Killing Time, and it's absolutely amazing. And one of the cool things is I thought going into this album, I thought that the guitar players, the guitar harmonies would be really rammed down my throat to the point of, we always mention this anecdotally about the great horror movies. You don't really see a lot of horror. It builds up to it. And I did kind of worry that with this, the position that Dave was in terms of using his voice, we'd get a lot of guitar harmonies to the point where they could kind of be interchanged and we wouldn't know which one was which. But actually, guitar players between Dave and Kiko are actually quite rare on this album. You don't hear a massive amount of them. And there's one on Killing Time that's amazing. And there's one on Soldier On, which you were just referring to, which is ridiculous as well. And I love the fact that the guitar harmonies were used sparingly and weren't absolutely rammed down my throat. I'm not sure if that's something you picked up on or made a note on, but I loved how the playoffs between Dave and Kiko are done sparingly and usefully, as opposed to there's one on every song because Dave's voice can't hold up and he needs something to fill the time.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. I think the harmonies were used sparingly. I think the way these songs have been constructed really suits not only Dave Mustaine's voice and longevity and stamina and all that good practical stuff, but I think in actuality it's what best serves the music and the band and the fan base as well. Like it's coupled together. This is the moments in this where I'm impressed at the transitions. It doesn't feel clunky at all. Like it just feel a real smooth process where one thing nicely fits into the other, The solos perfectly follow the chorus, and then the solo seems to lead to this nice breakdown, and the way that they transition from chord to chord, is just tremendous. I was really impressed with this. I was really impressed with this album holistically, and I watched a bit of the Rogan interview with him. I don't know if you caught any of this. Where he's talking.
No, I've got the Chris Jericho interview lined up to watch next. I didn't know he'd been on Rogan recently.
Yeah, last week. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. They've only put clips out at the moment. There's like an 11-minute clip of him talking about drug addiction, and there's like 3 minutes where Joe Rogan tries to bait him into talking about Metallica at length, and he doesn't bite. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And he talks, he talks about, he gives the lines, I gave this music and said, don't use my music, and then they used it anyway. So he's still a little bit like annoyed, but like I was impressed actually, and it brings me back to the album. Is that he appears to have got over that for the most part, which I think is good for him and also everyone else in his life. He appears to have put that to bed. And I think that maturity and that sort of reflection is probably helping him out. And when you listen to this record, the fact he's carved out a career like this, and you listen to some of these records, you listen to some of these songs, and how well put together some of these songs are, he should, apart from he should feel absolutely no bitterness and resentment about no longer being in Metallica, because he's literally carved out a career on his own. And even most recently at the 40th year was brought out an album like this that is terrific, and he is outlasted, and he's considerably outwriting pretty much all of his contemporaries in this genre. And that, fair enough. All right, he wasn't on the Black Album, so he's not like a multi-billionaire or something. That's fine. That's okay. He's doing okay. And he's also consistently writing some of the best thrash music still after 40 years. He has outlasted Slayer. Him alone has outlasted Slayer. And his writing and riff work supersedes James Hetfield's in the 21st century. It just does. And I say that as the biggest James Hetfield fan going. And he should be incredibly proud of that. And so it brings us nicely when we talk to a song like Mission to Mars, which has got that nostalgic feel. and he makes these references and stuff, which I'll leave to you to talk about, which is just terrific and a real nod for fans. And the moment you hear it, you
Yeah,
sort of
oh,
like
man.
grin and stuff, and it was a nice moment and that type of stuff. And he's able to do that because he's got this breadth of a career. I just think it's it's an achievement. It's a celebration of who he is.
Well, I think Mission to Mars is my favorite song on the album. It's got the most intriguing opening on the whole album as well. The kind of understated bass line that props up the clean riff. I think it's kind of Mustaine is inspired best, the songwriter on this album. His melodious tone goes down really well, and he's very clever. And you alluded to it before. He keeps the chorus lines really short so he doesn't overstretch himself, but it actually adds to the chorus's impact. There's So the kind of, as you can tell by the name of the song, this song is about like travel to outer space, travel to Mars and stuff. And there's a radio frequency call that they do that goes back down to like the tower that I'm not going to spoil actually, because it's the best moment on the album. It's one of the coolest things I've heard Megadeth do in years. And if you're a Megadeth fan, I'm not going to spoil it and tell you what they do, but they do something really, really cool. And after it's done, there is this like really high tempo 100-mile-an-hour 4-speed rhythm riff that comes back in, and it's so cool. The last 2 minutes of this song are like incredible. Megadeth fan listening to this, the end of Mission to Mars, it's really amazing, man. I couldn't help but just beam, Sam, listening to the final 2 minutes of this. I'm assuming you were relatively similar, without spoiling what happens.
No, absolutely. This album was so good, it made me thankful for like my life and my day. Listening to this yesterday, I was like, I'm listening to this Megadeth album like before it's coming out, and it's sick. And like, how cool is that?
Yeah.
And like, how cool is the fact that we can still listen to Megadeth records and all this type of stuff? Because as well, like we talked about this at the top, about the circumstances of his life. The chance that he was like still alive making music that's even out, let alone if it's any good, considering the heroin and the drugs and the fallouts and the cancer and everything else. It's an achievement on its own. But the fact that it's like you can put this album against most other Megadeth albums and it stands up. I think this is in the top 50% of Megadeth albums. Like if you compile the top 7 or 8, this is probably in there. Like I don't want to split hairs and I want to be like, well, is this better than X-Bat? Is this better than So Far So Good So What? Fine, we can split hairs there. But this is the 16th album. It's in the top 10, and it's their 16th album.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Like, to be able to do that is astonishing. And I mentioned this with Machine, and there's a lot of similarities actually, in the sense that perhaps the revolving door of members has prevented the band from becoming stale, has prevented the writing processes from becoming complacent, because Mustaine has to constantly integrate new people and has to constantly be at the top of his game and has to constantly sort of like not prove himself necessarily, because I don't think he needs to prove himself to anybody, but you definitely get that feeling whereas there's a new person coming in, I want to be at my best all the time and I want them to be on a good Megadeth album, and he's producing it and writing it and putting it together, so he obviously bears the weight of that responsibility, takes that very seriously. And maybe if he was sat across some dudes he knew for 35 years who he could just put anything with, maybe that's almost preventative to great music. There's that famous saying, isn't that the good is the enemy of great? You know, once you get to good, you don't really want to push forward to great. And maybe if he was around people that he was super comfortable with, he's like, well, this'll do. And, you know, me and David Ellison have been writing riffs for ages, so why wouldn't this be just as good as anything else we've written? Whereas these new members with, again, probably younger members, a bit of youth, a bit of energy, and it's worked out because it's not only is a terrific album, it's got a real verve and zip to it as well. I want to give a specific shout out, which has never happened probably in the history of reviews on Megadeth albums, but Dirk Verburen, the drummer, has a terrific album on this. There's some moments where they stop for drum fills. I'm like, this is wow, what, they're allowed to do this like in this band. There's bit like, can you imagine Dave Mustaine whipping his head around the first time this happened? And there's like drum intros and stuff, so that usually shows that he has faith in this group of people. Kiko Loureiro has a terrific album.
Kiko.
Working alongside David here. They're a great partnership, and we saw this lineup live, sick, and worked out tremendously. So when you consider all that, this is an achievement in and of itself. When you take context, it's a celebration of Dave Mustaine's continuing, thankfully, contribution to metal, but also a refreshing trip almost back to a nostalgic era where Megadeth were just one of the best thrash bands ever, because by the sounds of it, they absolutely still are one of the best thrash bands ever. And that is just phenomenal. And you can't say that about any of their contemporaries. Like we talked about this with Machine Head, you just can't. They're not in this world. It's phenomenal. This is album of the year contendership for me. Probably not top 3, but somewhere in that 5 to 9 range. I feel this is really good.
I feel like the best place for us to leave off really is the summation that you've just given on the album. I think that this is a fantastic achievement for Megadeth. Like you said, if this was a 5 out of 10, we'd have still been really happy about it, because at least with Dave Mustaine is alive and still writing music, we'd be happy with that. Actually, this album's like a 7.5, 8 out of 10 for me. I think this is a really, really great album. The best thrash album of the year, I can probably already say that. The best thrash album I've heard in a long time. It's probably the best thrash album I've heard since Endgame by Megadeth, which came out in 2009.
Endgame's
with
really
the exception
good.
of
Shout.
With the exception of like Pepper Trip and stuff. I think this is great. I'm really, really happy for what they've achieved here. This is a brilliant Megadeth album. Megadeth fans should be salivating, ready to hear this album. Specifically, Mission to Mars, it's the coolest thing ever. And I just think this is a fantastic achievement. Brilliant record. Every single member absolutely earns their weight in gold, especially like say Dirk Verburen. Again, you wouldn't have expected to hear us mention the drummer on the Megadeth album, but his performance is excellent here as well. Brilliant Megadeth album. So happy for them. This is going to do bits, man. Megadeth fans are going to love this.
Completely agree.
And that's a perfect place for us to leave off, Sam. Episode 112 of the Noizze podcast, but we are nowhere near done over the next few weeks. For the love of God, we have got Parkway Drive review coming up. We've got Behemoth review coming up, and we've got Slipknot review coming up as well. So if you are yet to subscribe or like or follow, depending on whichever service you use, please do that now. That would be really helpful for us. We are going to be back probably within the next 10 days or so, reviewing the new Parkway Drive album, or as soon as we possibly can. And then we've got Behemoth coming up after that. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast Network. Subscribe on YouTube, like or follow, depending on whichever podcast service you use. Tell your friends, get the word out about us. It's absolutely the best thing you can do to support us. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Enjoy Megadeth, the Sick, the Dead, and the Dying. It is amazing. And we will see you when we review Parkway Drive's new album, Darker Still. We love you. Bye.